Hey folks, this is JR with DIY Prepper. Welcome to the channel. The idea of the end of the world as we know it is something that people have always been obsessed about. If you're watching a channel like this one here, then there's a good chance that you're like me and you enjoy post-apocalyptic movies. I grew up on things like Independence Day, which in my opinion is still one of the best alien movies of all time, but the scary thing is there are plenty of more realistic ways that the world could end. History's full of examples of global cataclysms and societies failing, and if all that happened before, it could happen again. Now, before we get started with all this, I just want to make it clear that I'm not saying that any of these are imminent or anything like that. Some of them are actually pretty far-fetched and unlikely, at least in our lifetimes. But the first and most likely way the world could end is a massive global conflict. A third world war would cause devastation most people can't even imagine. Albert Einstein once said, "I know not with what weapons World War III will be fought, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones." And since the end of the most recent World War, humanity's ability to wipe out other humans has grown exponentially. Nuclear weapons in particular are many times more powerful than the ones dropped in 1945, and the ways that they can be delivered are a lot more sophisticated. Even though most individual warheads are a lot smaller than the multi-megaton nukes developed in the 50s, many missiles carry individual warheads which usually range between 100 and 800 kilotons, which is still big. This means that each missile has enough firepower to devastate multiple cities at a time. Then more countries than ever before have nuclear weapons. Those include the United States, Russia, China, the United Kingdom, France, India, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea. And what's worse is that many of these countries aren't on the best terms with one another. Relations between the US and Russia and China have been going downhill for the past several years, and India and Pakistan haven't been on good terms with each other in a while. Then chemical and biological weapons could cause widespread devastation as well. Biological weapons are especially dangerous since they can involve pathogens that have been engineered to be more lethal and spread easily. Those pathogens could also escape on accident and end up having the same results. Another issue with chemical and biological weapons is that their use on a major world power would warrant extreme retaliation, especially if it causes high casualties. This could result in a conflict spiraling out of control and spreading far beyond what it would have otherwise. Then the next way the world could end is through a runaway artificial intelligence or the misuse of artificial intelligence by a nation or other group. But before we get into the apocalyptic side of things, I want to talk about an issue that every one of us faces every day: risk to our online security. I've been using DeleteMe for a little over a year to help keep my online information secure, and I'd like to thank them for sponsoring us today. While most of us try to keep a low profile, protecting your privacy in OPSEC is a huge challenge because of information that's available about us online. All it takes is a few minutes of online research to figure out where someone lives, who they're married to, how many kids they have, and a whole lot more than that. Data brokers store this information and make it available to pretty much anyone willing to pay for it. Criminals and stalkers can use this information to harass you, steal your identity, or do phishing scams on your loved ones, but you do have the right and the ability to protect your information. DeleteMe will reach out to those different data broker websites and request to have your information removed. According to my most recent report, they've helped remove my information from numerous different locations on the web, with several more in progress. A lot of the places we checked were websites I hadn't even heard of before, so they're very thorough. If I tried to do all that myself, it could have taken literally days of work on my end. And DeleteMe also makes sure that your information doesn't pop up later on. I think they're a good service for preppers to use, and if you want to check them out, then you can use this link and code to get 20% off. Now, when most people think of like an artificial intelligence or AI apocalypse, it's usually something along the lines of the Terminator movies, where the machines rise up, use our own nukes against us, and then proceed to hunt down survivors using all manner of evil bipedal murder bots. And automated systems have nearly wiped us out before. In 1983, the Soviet early warning missile detection system showed that the United States had launched multiple missiles at the Soviet Union, which it did not. The man monitoring it, named Stanislav Petrov, thankfully felt like something was a little off, so he chose not to nuke America. Gold star for that guy. But if an automated system had been in his place, there's no telling what could have happened. Then there's also been evidence of AIs becoming a little aggressive. An Air Force colonel alleged that an autonomous drone took out its operator during a simulation. Now, since it was a simulation, no one got hurt, that's what that means, but supposedly the operator withheld the kill order for a particular target, and the AI didn't like that. It got points for taking out targets, and it liked points. So, in an attempt to get more points, it removed what was in its way by eliminating its operator. Good logic, right? Then when it was told, "Bad boy, don't do that anymore," it proceeded to take out the control tower used to send commands. There's also more humorous incidents of AI going a little rogue, like when the Bing chatbot started acting like the little emotionally disturbed kid from your 10th grade geometry class, started arguing with people about what year it was, and also insulted users and even compared some of them to the worst despots in human history. And even though the most realistic and immediate threats that we face from artificial intelligence are through things like manipulation and surveillance, cataclysms most of us would consider science fiction, like Skynet, could eventually happen. Then the next way that the world could end is a disease outbreak. We had a little taste of this in 2020, but it could have been a lot worse. The Black Death was a pandemic of bubonic plague that lasted from 1346 to 1353, and it killed between 30 and 50% of Europe's population and a third of the population of the Middle East. Then the Spanish flu in 1918 killed around 21 million, or 2.7% of the global population. Now, it is important to note that our ability to deal with those situations has gotten a lot better. Even the fact that we know to wash our hands and not jam our finger up our nose after we've been around a sick person, it's a pretty big deal. So the chances of something being able to do the same amount of damage as like the Black Plague did back a long time ago is pretty low. However, an engineered pathogen could cause a lot more damage than those that happen naturally. Then antibiotic-resistant germs are becoming more a problem and are a big concern, since the primary way that we deal with a lot of different illnesses and infections is through antibiotics. But even if an outbreak doesn't have like a 50% fatality rate, it can still cause massive disruption to our society. I'm sure we all remember the panic and shortages that happened in 2020, and that was with a pathogen that had a fatality rate of 1.4% at its worst. But even with that, it caused a ton of disruption. Aside from shortages, it helped contribute to numerous incidents of civil unrest and the erosion of personal freedoms. And all that would be a lot worse if we're dealing with something with a significantly higher fatality rate. The more dangerous something is, in addition to more people dying, more people are going to stay home to avoid getting sick. This would result in even worse shortages and also possibly breakdowns in critical infrastructure. Governments would inevitably attempt to exert more control, which would result in civil unrest. So it's very likely that the human response to a severe outbreak and the breakdown of our systems would have greater and longer lasting effects than the illness itself would. Right now, the potential boogeyman on the horizon is the avian flu. Thankfully, we haven't had any known human-to-human transmission of the current strain, so that's a good thing. Anyone who's gotten sick has either worked around poultry on a dairy farm or had like a backyard flock. And I say thankfully because it's estimated to have a 50% fatality rate. That's obviously very, very bad. Right now, though, the biggest issues that we're having because of it are just absolutely outrageous egg prices. Now, if you want a better idea of what a world-ending disease outbreak would look like, I strongly recommend checking out the show After Armageddon. It's a docudrama that came out, I think, in 2010, and it shows what a worst-case scenario for a virulent flu outbreak would look like. The next way that the world could end is from a massive asteroid striking Earth. That's what took the dinosaurs out, and there's a good chance that a large rock is going to hit Earth again sometime during its history. Right now, everyone's freaking out about the possibility of YR4 2024 hitting Earth on December 22nd, 2032. Merry Christmas, you filthy animals. And as I'm making this video, that asteroid's projected to have a 3.1% chance of hitting Earth, but what's a little concerning is that this number seems to be changing every day, and each time it does, it goes up a little bit. There's a possibility that it'll be even higher by the time that I release this video. Now, the good news is that 3.1% is still a pretty small number, and that asteroid isn't nearly big enough to wipe out the entire planet. Unfortunately, though, if it hits, it's going to hit somewhere. Its projected path goes over the northern part of South America, over the Atlantic Ocean to Central Africa and over parts of Asia. A lot of those areas are pretty sparsely populated, but one big exception to that is India. If you look at a nighttime satellite image of the Earth, India is lit up like a Christmas tree. If the asteroid hits there, it'd be absolutely devastating. With a diameter of around 50 meters, its impact would cause an 8 megaton explosion. According to Nuke Map, if an explosion of that size were to take place over Nagpur, India, nearly 2 million people would die. That's why people are referring to YR4 as a city killer. But keep in mind that this is a small asteroid we're talking about. The asteroid that took out the dinosaurs was around 6 to 9 miles in diameter, and when it hit off the coast of the Yucatan Peninsula, it created a fireball over 1,600 miles wide, and dust from the impact stayed in the air for around 15 or 20 years. Thankfully, though, we can track around 90% of the big asteroids that could only be stopped by like Bruce Willis and a team of oil drillers. The bad news is that smaller asteroids similar to YR4 are a lot harder to track, but we're getting better at it. Even if we didn't have enough time to nudge it or blow it up with a nuke, hopefully we'd at least have time to evacuate people in its path. And while the thought of an asteroid impact is scary and makes for really good movies, the one that hit the dinosaurs was the only one in our planet's history to cause a major extinction level event, at least that we're aware of. Volcanic activity, on the other hand, has caused 4 mass extinctions, and there are currently 20 supervolcanoes on Earth that could give us some big problems. The most well-known, at least in the United States, is the one underneath Yellowstone National Park in Wyoming. Then, not too far away from that, is the Long Valley in California, along with Toba in Indonesia and Taupo in New Zealand. Now, most volcanoes are only a concern if you live close to them. Even though Mount St. Helens was horrible, its blast only reached around 19 miles away from the volcano. But the eruption from a supervolcano will be a whole other animal. The last time Yellowstone erupted, it launched ash as far as northern Mexico. Fort Worth, Texas is a 2-day drive from Yellowstone, and if it were to erupt today, the Metroplex would probably be covered by 3 meters of ash. Then enough ash would also make it into the atmosphere that the entire planet would cool down for several years, which would have a big impact on global agriculture. Thankfully, though, the chances of a supervolcanic eruption are pretty stinking low. They don't happen very often. There actually hasn't been one throughout all of what most of us would consider human history. The last one was supposedly around 26,500 years ago, which predates our earliest civilization by around 23,000 years. So, if you're planning on going to Yellowstone this summer, rock on. You're looking at a 1 in 730,000 chance of an eruption taking place, which is a lot lower than the chances of you getting done in by some road rage guy on your way to the park. Then the next way that our way of life could come to an end is a massive solar flare. Now, it is important to note that this wouldn't be a global killer like some of the other things that we've talked about, since it wouldn't harm living organisms directly. However, if a solar flare was big enough and it happened to hit Earth just right, it could wreak havoc on the infrastructure that makes modern life possible. It would be very similar to an EMP caused by a high-altitude nuclear detonation. While we haven't experienced a solar flare this large during modern times, we do have an idea of what it would look like. In 1859, the Carrington event was a massive geomagnetic storm caused by a coronal mass ejection. Those are basically the sun's version of what my son refers to as wet toots. It caused auroras to be seen as far south as Panama and caused telegraph failures across North America and Europe. It caused fires in telegraph offices, and in some cases, telegraph operators were able to send messages even after they disconnected from their power supply. And yes, there were telegraphs in 1859, so if you're that one guy who wants to argue about that in the comments, please do at least 30 seconds of research before you do that. Some people. But if we were to experience a similar event today, it would be much, much worse. The power lines that stretch across nearly every populated area on the planet would act as gigantic antennae, similar to how the telegraph wires did during the Carrington event, just on a much larger scale. A 2013 study showed that a similar event in modern times would have cost between $6 billion and $2.6 trillion in damage just to the US alone. Adjusted for the wonderful inflation we've enjoyed for the past few years, that would be around $774 billion to $3.35 trillion in today's fun dollars. And we actually did have a near miss in July of 2012. A coronal mass ejection missed Earth by just 9 days, and if it would have hit, we would still be feeling the effects. Some estimate that it would have taken between 4 years and a decade to recover from that, but even if we did rebuild, life in most of the world would never be the same. Everything about our lives depends on technology. Without it, large-scale agriculture wouldn't be able to produce enough food to feed all the people, and refineries wouldn't be able to produce fuel to get stuff to different places. Folks in many areas would be stuck with just the resources that they have nearby, which wouldn't be anywhere close to enough, especially in larger cities or more remote communities. So while we could eventually recover, modern society would likely collapse at least for a time, and there would still be a massive loss of life. Now, if you want to see what would happen during a total collapse and what you would need to survive it, then go ahead and click here. Or if you want to see the things that you can stockpile for long-term survival, then click here. Once again, I'd like to thank Delete Me for sponsoring us today. Thank y'all for stopping by. Y'all have a good one.